The year is 73 AD, the First Jewish-Roman War, fueled by faith, rage, and desperation, turned the sacred into a battlefield. Cities burned. The temple in Jerusalem, once the beating heart of Jewish identity, now lay in ruins, reduced to ash beneath the sandals of Roman legions. The war was over, but the will to resist had not died. High above the desert floor, perched atop an isolated plateau with 400-meter vertical cliffs, stood Masada, an ancient fortress made impregnable by nature and defiance. It had become the final refuge of the Zealots, a radical sect who chose death over submission. Their leader, Eleazar ben Yair, vowed that Rome would not break them as it had broken Jerusalem. But Rome would not leave unfinished work. Marching eastward came Lucius Flavius Silva, a seasoned general bearing the banner of Legio Thex Fretensis, the 10th Legion. Trained, disciplined, and ruthlessly efficient, they had not come to negotiate. They had come to crush the last ember of resistance. Welcome back to Great History, your daily channel for the battles, empires, and untold stories that we dig deep so you don't have to. Today, we journey to Masada, a place where the last rebels of Judea made their final stand. We'll uncover how Rome brought not just force, but engineering brilliance to conquer the unconquerable. Step by step, stone by stone. If you love uncovering history with us, help us reach our first 50,000 subscribers. Just tap that red button below. Now, let's begin. In ancient Hebrew, Masada means fortress, and it truly lived up to the name. Perched atop a rhomboid mesa roughly 550 meters by 270, it was bordered by sheer cliffs, 400 meters straight down to the east and 90 meters to the west. It was nearly unreachable. First fortified under the Hasmoneans in the 1st century BC, likely as a military outpost guarding the eastern frontier of Judea, Masada was then transformed by Herod the Great, 37 to 31 BC, into a self-sufficient stronghold. Expecting rebellion or invasion, perhaps from Cleopatra or his own people, Herod reinforced Masada as a last resort sanctuary. A 1,400-meter-long casemate wall, about 4 meters thick and high, wrapped around the mesa like armor. It was punctuated by more than 30 towers and 4 tightly controlled gates. Inside, Herod built more than just a fortress. He built a city in waiting. Lavish palaces lined the northern tip, decorated with Roman frescoes, mosaics, and terraced bathhouses. Over a dozen enormous storerooms could hold up to 2,700 tons of food. Rainwater, scarce in the Judean desert, was channeled through a system of aqueducts and rock-hewn cisterns, capable of sustaining over 1,000 people for 2 to 3 years in the arid Judean climate. 3 narrow serpentine paths, most famously the twisting snake path, were the only routes up, easily defensible in single file. Masada was more than self-sufficient. It was nearly siege-proof. Its position added to its significance. From the summit, one could see far across the Dead Sea and watch the trade routes that cut through the Judean wilderness below. Whoever controlled Masada controlled the eastern approach to Judea. That made it not just a physical stronghold, but a strategic keystone in the defense of the region. After Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, Masada took on a new meaning. It became the last bastion of Jewish resistance, home to a radical faction known as the Sicarii, led by Eleazar ben Yair. Their presence turned the fortress into a symbol. As long as Masada held out, the rebellion lived. To the Romans, then, crushing Masada wasn't just a military operation, it was a political imperative, and the events that followed would make that brutally clear. Marching eastward came Lucius Flavius Silva, a seasoned and calculating Roman general. one chosen not merely for rank, but for his precision in siege warfare. With him came Legio ex Fretensis, the 10th Legion, no ordinary detachment, but a unit forged in the fires of civil war, eastern campaigns, and brutal urban warfare. Their banner bore the name of Caesar, and their record carried a legacy of conquest from Gaul to Jerusalem. Silva, born into a senatorial family in Urbisaglia, Italy, was appointed governor, legatus, of Judea between 72 and 81 AD, the man entrusted to end the First Jewish War decisively. He was not Rome's fiery conqueror, but its executor of order, a general known for precision, restraint, and unwavering discipline. In a theater like Judea, where politics and control mattered as much as victory, Silva was Rome's ideal agent. The legion under his command, Legio ex Fretensis, was more than a fighting force. It was Rome's instrument of strategic dominance in the East. Founded around 41 to 40 BC by Octavian and steeped in naval legend, its name deriving from the narrows of Sicily, Fratum Siculum, the legion earned emblems of a bull, dolphin, trireme, and boar, symbols of strength, naval prowess, and relentless courage. Legio X had long been posted in Jerusalem and Judea from 70 AD onward, following the destruction of the temple. It served both as garrison and symbol of conquest, stamping Roman authority across the province for over a century. This meant its legions had first-hand experience with Jewish terrain, climate, and resistance tactics. This legion had become a specialist force in siegecraft, masters of building camps under fire, raising siege ramps in impossible terrain, and deploying artillery with surgical precision. Unlike other legions trained primarily for open-field combat, the 10th had spent years fighting in the tight corridors and fortified towns of Judea. They knew how to break rebels who hid behind stone walls and steep cliffs. Their equipment and methods also reflected their environment. In the scorching Judean desert, the soldiers of Fretensis adapted their gear, favoring lighter armor, reinforced sandals for rocky ascents, and composite shields better suited for heat and dust. They had become desert warriors, engineers, and executioners rolled into one. Indeed, Legio X had played a central role in the siege of Jerusalem, 66 to 70 AD, famous for their execution of war machines capable of hurling 25-kilogram stones more than 400 meters, softening walls before infantry storms. They had mastered mass construction under fire, in heat, dust, and starvation. This made them uniquely qualified to attempt the near impossible, the siege of Masada. From a strategic standpoint, deploying Silva and Legio X sent a clear message. Rome wasn't sending inexperienced auxiliaries. It was dispatching its most battle-hardened, most psychologically ironclad legion, the one who had already seen Jerusalem burn. Their presence at Masada implied that failure was not an option, neither militarily nor politically. In the autumn of 72 AD, Lucius Flavius Silva marched his force Legio ex Fretensis, auxiliary cohorts, and thousands of Jewish captives from Jerusalem and surrounding forts across Judea toward Masada, the final pocket of Jewish resistance. Josephus records that Silva commanded a force of 8,000 to 9,000 fighting men within a total contingent of roughly 15,000 souls, vastly outnumbering the 960 Zealots defending the fortress. Legio ex Fretensis arrived at Masada as Rome's engineering spearhead, carrying with them all the tools of a precision siege. Ballistae and scorpiones for range suppression, bolts and stones aimed at defenders on the plateau. There were at least 53 ballistae, torsion-powered siege engines capable of launching stone balls and bolts, many weighing between 0.6 kilograms to 22 kilograms, recovered around the ramp and walls, especially concentrated on the northwest side where the western assault was mounted. These were not just for destruction, but psychological suppression, to pin defenders behind walls while construction proceeded. Along with them was a massive battering ram, Ares, mounted within a towering siege engine. Supporting this machinery was a full complement of Roman military engineering tools: beams, pulleys, picks, shovels, mantlets, and more, all managed by the Fabrici, professional military engineers responsible for construction and logistical maintenance in the field. But what exactly did they intend to do with all this equipment? These tools made possible one of the most ambitious feats of siege warfare in antiquity: the construction of a complete encirclement of Masada. The first phase was strategic isolation. After the army moved along the Judean plateau and the western approaches to the Dead Sea, eventually encamping around the base of Masada. There, they established 8 square, disciplined camps, labeled A through H around the base of Masada, each precisely positioned to monitor escape routes or defend against external rescue attempts. These camps housed the troops, supply depots, and command centers, with Camp F as the largest and the central headquarters. Connecting these 8 positions was a circumvallation wall, limes, a stone-built perimeter roughly 11 kilometers, nearly 7 miles long, 1.5 meters thick, and standing 3 to 4 meters high. 15 observation towers reinforced the wall, giving the Romans full surveillance and control of the site. According to Josephus, and confirmed by modern archaeological surveys, this first phase of construction took approximately 2 to 3 weeks to complete. It was a message as much as a fortification. To the defenders atop Masada, it said plainly, their plight was sealed and no aid would arrive. There is no way out. The next challenge was to reach the fortress itself. Masada's eastern and southern faces were sheer cliffs, virtually inaccessible. But on the western side, Silva identified a natural feature known as the White Spur, Luque, a rocky slope that jutted toward the base of the fortress. Here, Roman engineers began construction of a siege ramp, an immense embankment built from stone rubble, earth, and timber supports. It rose approximately 60 meters, about 200 feet, in height, stretched 200 to 600 meters in length, and was wide enough to support siege machinery. This ramp, built under scorching desert heat and under constant threat of missile fire from above, was completed in 11 to 16 days by a workforce of around 6,000 to 8,000 soldiers. Modern archaeological investigations confirm both the ramp's scale and the rapid pace of its construction, an extraordinary testament to Roman engineering under pressure. As the great earthen ramp neared completion, the Roman camp stirred with new intensity. Dust and smoke from the construction still hung over the Judean desert, but all eyes now turned to the towering siege engine that stood waiting at the base of the artificial slope. Atop the ramp, Roman forces erected a colossal siege tower, estimated at 18 meters, 60 cubits tall. Its construction had been carefully calculated. The base was wide and stable enough to prevent tipping, and its iron plates were bolted onto a wooden frame to resist fire arrows and falling rocks from above. Clad in iron plating to resist flames and missiles, and built with multiple levels to house artillery and soldiers alike, it represented the apex of Roman siege engineering, one final immovable piece in the machinery of conquest. Moving such a behemoth was no simple matter. Hundreds of legionaries were assigned to the task, and the operation was conducted with military precision. Thick rollers, wooden logs placed beneath the tower, were used to ease its weight forward, while ropes, pulleys, and winches helped guide its ascent up the ramp. Engineers barked orders, while teams of sappers and laborers monitored the slope for soft spots or structural failures. Any shift in the ramp's foundation could spell disaster for the entire plan. By the time the siege tower reached its final position near the summit, it stood as tall as the fortress walls themselves. The Roman engineers had calculated every angle, every elevation, so that once it reached the top of the ramp, it would be close enough to allow direct assault. Its battering ram, suspended from a heavy crossbeam, hung like a pendulum of fate, aimed squarely at the western casemate wall. From the upper decks of the tower, Roman engineers had carefully mounted scorpiones, designed to fire iron-tipped bolts with lethal accuracy. As defenders peeked above the parapets, attempting to throw javelins or loose arrows, they were met with a barrage of bolts that struck with pinpoint precision. Some were thrown back with deadly wounds before they could even raise their arms. Below the scorpiones, the larger ballistae came into play. These machines hurled heavy stone projectiles, roughly 10 to 15 kilograms each, at the walls and towers along the fortress perimeter. The goal was not to breach the stonework immediately. Rather, these salvos were meant to disorient, suppress, and limit the mobility of the Jewish defenders. The noise alone was demoralizing. The sharp cracks of twisted wood, the low growl of tensioned cords releasing, the thunder of stones smashing against masonry. As the tower crept forward, these engines continuously fired on the top of Masada's walls, harassing zealot archers and slingers. They created gaps in the defenders' formation, allowing the battering ram below to operate with fewer interruptions. Hidden in the lower chamber of the tower and manned by a dedicated team, it began a slow but relentless assault on the western casemate wall. As the artillery softened the defenses above, the ram below began to thud rhythmically against the stone. To shield the tower and its crews from retaliatory fire, Roman engineers had covered the siege tower with metal plating and wet hides, making it virtually flame-proof. Arrows either bounced off the armored walls or stuck harmlessly in soaked leather. Occasionally, the defenders tried to hurl firebrands down from the walls, but Roman archers and artillery suppressed any such efforts with ruthless efficiency. Outside the tower, additional ballistae had been positioned behind Roman lines, mounted on platforms or wheels, carefully aimed. These machines bombarded the fortress's upper battlements, softening resistance, and making it harder for defenders to hurl firepots or drop stones on the advancing tower. The Romans were not just firing blindly. Every shot was calculated, each elevation adjustment, every timing interval, honed by decades of battlefield experience and the brutal art of siegecraft. Their goal was not just to kill, but to suppress, to force the defenders behind cover, to fray their nerves with relentless pressure. The ballista crews operated in organized shifts, ensuring a near-continuous rate of fire that echoed through the canyon like a heartbeat of war. As one team loaded and fired, another readied fresh ammunition. Supporting soldiers worked behind the scenes, passing up bolts, oiling the sinew-bound torsion springs, checking for signs of wear or heat damage. The dry desert air, with its scorching daytime temperatures, could warp wooden frames or shrink lashings, but the engineers adapted quickly. Maintenance became as critical as aim. Inside Masada, fear began to seep into the cracks of resolve. The Sicarii had fortified their minds with zeal, not engineering. They had trusted in height and isolation, believing that the cliffs and distance would keep the enemy at bay. But now, that sense of safety was unraveling, one mechanical shriek at a time. The sky above their walls rained iron, and their once unreachable stronghold was being drawn down to earth by Roman willpower and ingenuity. As the siege tower inched forward, its massive multi-storied frame clad in wet animal hides to resist fire, Roman infantry crept behind it, under cover of vinii, those mobile sheds that resembled oversized tortoise shells. These soldiers were not idle. Some cleared debris from the ramp, others reinforced the structure with fresh stones and packed earth, stabilizing the incline for the tower's weight. Working in grim coordination, they advanced methodically. Teams carried fascines, tight bundles of brushwood, used to fill in ditches or level out uneven ground near the base of the wall, preparing for the final push. Masada's outer defense was a casemate wall, essentially two parallel walls filled with earth and rubble, forming a thick structure meant to absorb blows. But the Roman ram, once brought within reach, struck it again and again. Each swing of the Ares sent a deep, echoing crack through the stonework. Archaeological remains at the site would later confirm what Josephus recorded. The Romans breached Masada at the precise location he described. The damage pattern, consistent with repeated targeted blows, suggests the ram succeeded in tearing open the final defense of the fortress. As dusk approached, the rhythmic pounding of the battering ram took on a different character. For weeks, it had struck the casemate wall with a dull, stubborn thud. Stone against stone. Labor without reward. But now the impact rang differently. Each blow echoed with a hollow timbre, reverberating through the fortress walls and through the air itself. The engineers of the 10th Legion, trained in the acoustics of siege, paused and listened. They exchanged glances. That sound, like the drum of a cracked amphora, meant only one thing: the wall was ready to fall. With one final coordinated push, the great ram swung forward, its iron-shod head crashing against the weakened masonry. The wall gave way with a groan, as if Masada itself were exhaling its last breath. A section of the outer fortifications collapsed inward, spilling stone, timber, and choking clouds of dust down the steep slope of the cliff behind it. The ground trembled. Josephus, writing years later, described this moment in vivid detail. The Roman ram smashing both stone and timber in a crescendo of violence. The final breach forced open by the unyielding discipline of Roman siegecraft. Modern excavations have found collapse patterns and debris at the breach point consistent with his account: burnt beams, shattered masonry, the remnants of an ending. The breach had been made. A path now lay open through the outer defenses of Masada. But the Romans did not rush in. Flavius Silva held his men back. He had fought too many campaigns in Judea to be fooled by a shattered wall. In Jotapata, defenders had set traps with scalding oil. In Gamla, they used the narrow streets to funnel legionaries into deadly kill zones. In Jerusalem, they turned every house into a fortress and every alley into a tomb. A broken wall could be an invitation or a death trap. Silva knew this too well. Masada's defenders, the Sicarii, were not ordinary soldiers. They were zealots, fanatics, survivors of the fall of Jerusalem. Men and women who had chosen exile on a cliff rather than surrender. They had nothing left to lose. So Silva gave the order: halt. Engineers would examine the breach. Archers and artillerymen would cover the gap, and the legion would bivouac just outside the broken wall. Night was falling, and Roman doctrine was clear. Never enter a compromised fortress in darkness unless absolutely necessary. Too many things could go wrong. Shadows could hide ambushes. Corridors could lead to traps. And discipline could collapse in the chaos of blind confrontation. Better to wait for light, for order, for clarity. So Silva did what Roman commanders had been trained to do. He advanced methodically without haste. Engineers assembled a forward testudo, rows of legionaries locking their large, curved scuda together above and in front, forming a living shell. Behind this shielded wedge, scouts moved cautiously into the breach, their every step watched by archers and artillerymen, still positioned atop the siege tower. From that height, they could rain down covering fire should any trap be sprung. But the breach offered only silence. The scouts found no resistance, no boiling oil, no arrows from hidden galleries. Only signs of an abrupt flight, overturned water jars, scattered bundles of dates, weapons abandoned where they'd fallen. There had been defenders here, and recently. Now, the rooms were empty and the corridors dim. It was as if Masada itself were holding its breath. Beyond the breach, the Romans encountered a secondary wall, built of rough stone, hurriedly reinforced with timber beams. It was not part of the original Herodian fortifications. The defenders had likely erected it in haste, a last stand against the inevitable. Silva ordered fire. Torches were hurled into the dry wood. For a moment the flames sputtered. Then the wind turned violently, driving the fire back toward the Romans. The heat surged. Smoke poured into the breach. Panic flickered at the edges of discipline, but the legions held. Then, as if summoned by fortune or fate, the wind shifted again. Josephus tells us it turned as though by divine will. The fire caught. Flames climbed the timber supports. Cracks echoed through the walls. The final defenses of Masada burned like a funeral pyre. Still, Silva waited. No trumpet sounded the charge. He ordered the men to stand down, to hold the perimeter, to make camp just beyond the breach. No Roman generals stormed a burning fortress in darkness. Not when morning light could offer clarity. The rules of war, like the rules of Rome, demanded order. They would strike at dawn, when every movement could be seen and controlled. At first light, the Romans advanced. Columns of legionaries moved with discipline and caution through the shattered casemate wall. They expected resistance, barricades, arrows, fire, but encountered none. The air was still, unnervingly still. The sun, rising over the eastern cliffs of the Dead Sea, cast long shadows across the inner courtyard. They proceeded in testudo formation, shields raised, eyes scanning for signs of movement. Behind them, engineers inspected the breach, while tribunes and centurions directed squads deeper into the fortress. Then came the first whiff, smoke, but not fresh, charred wood, burned cloth, the unmistakable reek of flesh. The legionaries moved cautiously toward the center of the fortress, toward the storerooms, the communal buildings, the great hall. The doors stood ajar. Inside, it was dark. And then they saw men, women, and children, hundreds of them. Josephus would later record the speech of Eleazar ben Yair, leader of the Sicarii. He had stood before the people of Masada on that final night and urged them to choose death over slavery. "Let us die," he had said, "unenslaved by our enemies and leave this world as free men." And they had agreed. They cast lots. 10 men were selected to carry out the grim duty. They moved from room to room, ending the lives of their kin. Then those 10 drew lots again. 1 man remained. And when it was done, when all was quiet, he turned the sword upon himself. When the Romans arrived, there was no one left to fight. After the gates of Masada were breached and the eerie silence gave way to the grim discovery within, the Romans found only a few survivors, 2 women and 5 children, huddled deep in the stone cisterns, trembling and whispering the tale of what had happened. From their mouths, the truth of the final night emerged like smoke from a dying fire. There had been no last stand, no final clash of steel, only a collective decision, grim, deliberate, and unspeakably resolute. Nearly 960 men, women, and children had chosen to die by their own hands, rather than submit to Roman chains. Fathers took the lives of their own families. Then 10 men were chosen by lot to kill the rest. And finally, The last man turned the blade upon himself. In the wake of this haunting scene, the Roman soldiers, likely shaken even in their victory, cleared the site, stripped the fortress of what remained, and dismantled the siege equipment that had scarred the mountain's side. Masada became more than just a battleground. It became a symbol of unbroken will, and a lasting testament to Roman discipline and engineering. The ramp is still there, thousands of years later, a permanent scar carved into the face of history. The Ballista, the siege ramp, the towering assault platforms, these were tools. But combined, they became something far more devastating, a weapon of psychological destruction. Rome didn't just break walls, it broke hope. For Rome, it was a tactical success, the final knot tied on a decade of revolt. So now I ask you, what kind of power drives a people to die free rather than live conquered? If you were at Masada that day, a zealot standing on that cliff, would you fight to the very last breath, or choose death to preserve your dignity? Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.